So somebody decided seriously tonight that they are going to save that money, right? But that's some real conviction behind it, right? And but the mobile money sits in the same exact wallet as the spending money, you know, one tap away, no separation at all. Then comes 2 weeks later, the resolve's gone, and the balance looks the same as it always did. You know, I mean, nobody in that story lacked motivation from day one. You know, the motivation was completely real. It just wasn't the thing standing between the person and the outcome. Hold on. But you know, here's what a lot of behavioral research actually shows, and it cuts directly against how most people think about self-improvement. You know, motivation usually gets treated like the main ingredient. You know, psych yourself up, and the behavior follows. You know, but motivation is a mood, and moods are unreliable by nature. We all know that. What actually predicts whether a behavior sticks, you know, consistently across dozens of studies is the environment surrounding the decision, not how badly you want it. You know, how many steps stand between the impulse and the outcome. It's a progression. And guys, there was this psychologist named Peter Gollwitzer. You know, he ran a body of research on something called implementation intentions. Okay, essentially deciding in advance exactly when and where a behavior will happen instead of just deciding that it will happen eventually. You know, not I'll exercise more, you know, specifically this time at this place, you know, this trigger, you know, and I mean, across a wide range of studies, people who made that kind of specific plan followed through at rates often 2 to 3 times higher than people who just had the general intention, you know, same motivation level, you know, wildly different outcome, you know, because one group left the moment of decision up to willpower in real time, you know, and the other group had already made the decision in advance, you know, when they weren't under any pressure at all. Come on. And the main part of implementation intentions is that there's something known as habit stacking. After I do this habit, I'm gonna do this other habit. After this habit, I'm gonna do the next one and the next one. You know, but this is also where the actual research on self-control gets interesting. You know, because it contradicts the popular image of it almost completely. You know, a psychologist named Wilhelm Wilhelm Hoffman, if I'm not mistaken, ran a study where he had people carry devices that pinged them randomly throughout the day, asking in the moment whether they were experiencing a temptation or whether they were resisting it. You know, the people who scored highest on self-control weren't the ones winning more, you know, internal battles against temptation. They were the ones reporting fewer temptations to begin with, you know, because their daily environment simply wasn't putting the temptation option directly in front of them as often, you know. I mean, guys, don't get me wrong, self control in the data looked less like willpower and more like environmental design, you know. The disciplined people weren't fighting harder, you know, they'd arrange things so there was less to fight, you know. They'd arrange things so there'd be less to fight. I mean, don't get me wrong, but there's a version of this that's been running in Kenya for generations, you know, long before any of this research had a name, you know, table banking, there's been chamas, you know, a group of people pulling savings together, you know, with real social accountability attached to it, you know, and often actual physical or structural separation from easy spending access, you know, like funds locked in the group, sometimes literally inaccessible without going through other members first, you know. Nobody in a chama is relying purely on individual willpower, you know. to not touch the savings. You know, the structure itself removes the option. You know, the environment does the discipline that motivation alone was never going to reliably provide. You know, compare that to compare that to money just sitting in an open mobile wallet. You know, one tap from being spent on anything. I mean, same people, same person, same desire to save, but completely different outcome because one setup makes the good behavior the path of least resistance, and the other makes the bad behavior the path of least resistance. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but I think the honest, slightly uncomfortable takeaway here is that most people who fail at building habits weren't lacking in habits. People who want wanting to build a habit weren't lacking in character. You know, they were relying on a system. You know, they will rely on pure willpower, moment to moment. You know, that behavior science has shown repeatedly in one of the least reliable tools available for the job. You know, you blame yourself for that isn't insight. You know, it's just misplacing the diagnosis. You know, and I don't think the fix is complicated because because even though it's not easy, because if decide the specific time and the place in advance before the moment of temptation ever shows up. You know, you need to build in structural separation for anything you're trying to protect. You know, like savings, focus, your attention, just like the way a charmer does with money. You know, and stop treating. You need to stop treating a failed habit as proof of weak character. You know, when it's usually just proof of weak setup. You know, the person with the mobile wallet still has the exact same amount of motivation they started with. You know, what actually needs to change isn't how badly they want it, it's how many taps stand between wanting it and losing it again. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching me.